Hello and welcome to Rajapaksa Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Razum Pereira. Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, in a telephonic conversation on Saturday, agreed to accelerate Indian-assisted development projects in Sri Lanka and discuss the possibility of promoting investments by India's private sector. Well, the move assumes significance against the backdrop of China's concerned push to develop infrastructure projects in Sri Lanka and other countries under its Belt and Road Initiative, which has led to criticism from the US both about these countries being exposed to predatory loans. Prime Minister Modi also had a telephonic conversation with his counterpart in Mauritius and discussed enhancing cooperation in several areas, including measures to support the financial sector of Mauritius. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze India's Indian Ocean diplomacy. Joining me on the program today are Vice Admiral Shekhar Sinha, retired maritime expert; Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation; and Vivek Karju, former ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. All right. Well, Ambassador, I'd like to begin the program with you first. Let's try and understand and analyze, what do you make of India's efforts in helping and aiding our friends in the Indian Ocean region?
I think the Prime Minister's call to both these leaders was timely. These are part of our security within the ambit of our country's security concerns, and there are deep economic interests too. And as you correctly observed in your opening remarks, the Chinese are becoming more and more active in the Indian Ocean, and we have to take measures to counteract Chinese activism. So we will have to upgrade our contacts with these countries. But let's face it, these countries too at the moment will be seeing how India is being impacted by COVID-19. It is a fact that our economy will now be in negative territory, and the Chinese, for the time being at least, are not only doing sort of handling their situation somewhat satisfactorily, but are also being very, very assertive. So it is a trying time for our diplomatic efforts, and the Prime Minister's contacts have given us an opening which we will have to build upon and build upon rapidly despite our current difficulties.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. So, Admiral, this is where I'd like to bring you in. Let's first try and understand and analyze the strategic importance of all these island nations. They are small islands, but at the end of the day, they pack quite a punch because of their strategic locations in the Indian Ocean region.
Quite right, Frank. And I'll take off from where Ambassador Vivek Karju left. And he mentioned that it is very timely. My sense is that why it is timely is because China's aggressive posture on the line of actual control and in some places on the international boundary. This is also can work as a signal to China that if you escalate it any further on line of actual control, we have the ability to pin you down in the Indian Ocean region. Because if you see the oil import of China on the Gulf, Sri Lanka, Strait of Malacca, sea lane of communication is about 56%. And similarly, from Angola, it is about 12%. And also it is about 12% from the South American countries, which most of these sea lanes of communication pass through very close to south of Mauritius, and some of them through the Madagascar Channel, which is only 1,150 kilometers from Port Louis. So, this is a very, very good signaling. And I was doing some reading day before yesterday, and I looked at the globe and I found that if the Chinese feel they are very strong and assertive on the land border, and they will do whatever they want, this is just a signal that hang on, we can always move our scales up in the Indian Ocean region, where China is badly handicapped at the moment.
Okay, all right, Professor. As far as the entire COVID-19 situation is concerned, it has had a major impact, really, as far as these nations, these island nations are concerned, because they're all dependent on tourism, and tourism has taken a real big hit. And so they're all reeling under this massive pressure that the lockdowns have had. So, what can India do to help in a situation like this?
Frank, I think India will have to go back to the basics, which Prime Minister himself had outlined in his famous speech in Mauritius in 2015, which is that India, at the end of the day, would like to be a guarantor of security and growth for the region. So, security and growth for all. Sagar was the mantra that was given. And I think that if you frame India's response around some of the basic principles that were enunciated then you will have to look at it both in terms of what India can do in helping these countries, which are intricately linked with the larger growth story of India. So we only heard today, I think, that or yesterday from the Sri Lankan office, that they are talking of a 1.1 billion USD forex swap from India. On top of the 400 million from the SAARC fund. So clearly there is a recognition that India, as a larger country, larger economic power in the region, still has the ability, with all the problems that it faces, to help these countries get out of the COVID-19 economic distress that all of us seem to be facing. And at the same time, the issues that I think have already been highlighted, that security remains a core concern for both these countries and for us. That India wants its own periphery to be stable. And at the moment when Chinese are rattling up a number of pressure points, not simply around India's periphery, but also around South China Sea, it is important that we have these negotiations in place. We have a consultative mechanism in place, open channels, so that perhaps if time comes, if need be, one can also start building a regional security mechanism or reinvigorating those regional security mechanisms that already exist. So I think there is a larger paradigm here which India has to look at these countries through, and which is already there with us for the last few years, on which India has tried to build the capacities of these countries. India has tried to engage them politically and economically.
Absolutely. All right. Since we're talking about Sri Lanka, yes, Ambassador, I'm coming to you. You wanted to add something to that as well. And let me just ask a follow-up question, really, from what the professor has just said. What do you make of this currency swap arrangement of up to $1.1 billion with Sri Lanka? And let's not forget, India has also said that, it's going to further deliver on the development projects in Sri Lanka. A few houses were delivered, not few, 44,000 of them were delivered very recently. We saw the work being done rapidly in Sri Lanka. So that's something that is a positive for us as well.
No, I think you are correct. These measures that we have taken will give a sense of assurance to the Sri Lankans that despite our difficulties, we have the wherewithal to continue with our assistance program and to help them. But let us also face it. We are in a very, very competitive environment. The Mauritius and Sri Lanka, despite our civilizational ties, despite our contacts, are also sovereign countries, and they look to their interests. So they will be keeping a very careful eye, evaluating what they can get from China and what they can get from us. So at the end of the day, we have to convey to them quite convincingly that whatever temporary difficulties that we may face, our commitments to them remain steadfast, and that we regard the Indian Ocean as an area of our primary concern in security and economic terms. So this is a time for activism which is being shown correctly, but it is also a time of caution. And I also feel that this is the time to convey signals to the Chinese, not only in terms of what the Admiral has said, though I have a few question marks about our ability there, our full ability there. The Admiral is of course the final word on this, on how we can if we have idea that the Chinese will be very worried about Indian capacities at stopping the flow of materials which are so vital for their interests, but at the but I really feel that this is a time also for some conservatism in our thinking, not adventurism.
Okay. Okay. I think that's a very valid point that is being made by the ambassador. Admiral, your thoughts on not being adventurous at this point in time, but to look at the picture as a whole and be concerned and look at a holistic picture and then consider and see what we are good at and focus on that rather than trying to, needle the Chinese right now.
Not really. I mean, it's, there is a lot of signaling going on at the moment. The Chinese are having the National People's Congress is on right now. Next year, the centenary year of the Communist Party of China. Year after that, there is a congregation of all the elected, sort of so-called elected deputies, all the delegates who will choose a leader for a period of 10 years. Now, the problem out here is that if they name somebody, it means that they have not accepted President Xi Jinping's idea of president for life. Or if they name, but if they don't name anybody, then it means that, let President Xi Jinping form his own standing committee and groom people to take over the job from him whenever they feel like. So that is one of the issue. Right now, the military has shown that they are firmly behind him, and therefore they can do all this, and therefore this activism on the. I'm sure that our diplomats are they're already working very hard to make sure that it goes. But let me also convey, or let me tell the viewers that the Chinese are very worried about the Indian Ocean and India's presence here. Like the ambassador said that it is our area of interest, and we are. If you see Sri Lanka and Mauritius, they are on two extreme ends of the Indian Ocean by and large. One is here and one is right at the end, from where the monitoring of Chinese, you may not do any adventurism, but when you are present in those areas, the Chinese will be very careful in doing anything on the land border. Because that at land border, it is quite possible that China may be having a numerical superiority, but as far as Indian Ocean is concerned, it remains an area of great concern of the Chinese. Because every time you meet them, and every time they will ask you, what will you do in the Indian Ocean? You think we can make a grouping of ourselves for Indian Ocean security architecture? I mean, these are the things they have been talking about. And I have no doubts in my mind that time comes, Gwadar will be China's Indian Ocean Command. It's going to happen in 10 years, 15 years, moment, he's got little more assets. And Pakistan will be happy to lease it out because they're not going to pay back any of the loans, which is so heavy on them. So I think that it is not really an adventurism, but a signal that, look, we have our reach. These countries are with us. We are helping them during a very time of crisis. They aren't helping anybody. They're helping themselves. So the point is that whatever projects are going on, they are going on for a long time in Sri Lanka and wherever, in Mauritius, and they are sovereign countries. They will keep their interest in mind. But India is present there, and they have a place where they can go. That thought itself is, a little bit disturbing because it's a logistics nightmare for China.
Okay. All right. So, Professor, this is where we talk about Mission Sagar then. We'll widen the scope of the discussion a little bit. Supply materials were sent out to these nations, these small island nations in the Indian Ocean, be it Madagascar, Comoros, Mauritius, Seychelles, Maldives, sent them food supplies, sent them supplies of medicines. How long is all of this, or how far do you think all of this is going to go as far as India is concerned?
See, I think there is no doubt that what India has been able to do for the smaller nations and for South Asian nations in the sort of COVID environment is a strong signal that India remains committed to building capacities. India remains committed to taking these countries along at a time of grave distress. And I think India has shown certain leadership ability, certain leadership capacities being projected in the region, which helps India's narrative of Sagar. Because after all, what does it mean in operational terms? What does this idea that security and growth for all means when when you are really trying to implement a policy. And India has tried to demonstrate during this time of grave crisis that this means that remains interested in working with countries with all the problems that India on its own faces. It is willing to share. It is willing to share resources. It is willing to share its capacities. It is willing to share the expertise, the health teams that have visited these countries, along with the health consignments, medical supplies, etc. Sends a very strong signal that India remains committed to that larger narrative. And I think that helps, that shores up India's credibility. There is, of course, Ambassador Kaju is very right that there is a problem of perception that India faces, that at times India is the laggard here when it comes to the race with the Chinese. Chinese are very quick to deliver. Chinese seemingly look very competent, and Chinese have great resources. They have been able to throw money at countries to show that they are the bigger power here in the region. Now, clearly for India, the narrative is that we have our own resources, but the way we spend those resources is in consultation with countries which surround us, where it's a bottom-up approach that India follows. India expects these countries to tell us what they need, and in turn we deliver. And I think that consultative mechanism that India has demonstrated, even during this crisis, shores up that credibility factor that I think for a long time has been a problem for India. And the more India does that, the better its chances are in terms of enhancing its credibility, both in terms of delivering growth and as well as security for the region, which is, after all, the premise on which Sagar, the policy, is based. So my sense is that we have done well, but we have to continue on this path for some time if we want to see the kind of results that we want.
Okay, Ambassador, there is no doubt that there is tremendous goodwill really as far as India is concerned from these countries. But is goodwill enough? How do we convert this goodwill to gains? What must we do? And can we convert it to gains is the real question.
No, it is absolutely correct that unlike the Chinese, India is not seen as a threatening power. We are not intrusive in these countries' internal affairs. Our businessman approach is again not seen as threatening to local interests as the Chinese have behaved, and the Chinese conduct themselves not only in these countries but also in large parts of Africa. So there is no doubt that our goodwill is of another quality altogether as compared to the Chinese, despite the Chinese abilities to deliver on projects and projects very quickly. In fact, I've seen some reports where the Chinese have lamented themselves that India seems to be doing much better when it comes to earning goodwill. So this is fine, and I think the steps that we've taken today are laudable. But the question that I have in my mind is, I think, a valid question, though I'm delighted hearing what Admiral Saab has told us and has assured us. The question is that will these countries be looking at the economic impact of COVID-19 and how we extricate ourselves from from this impact? That is a question, because through all the years of diplomacy that I was involved in, I learned one simple fact, that at the end of the day, your diplomatic clout is dependent on your economic performance at home. As long as India's growth story was recognized the world over, everyone was at our door. So today, at this time, when we are facing difficulties, and that's the truth. I mean, the RBI itself has said so. So these countries will look out to see how quickly we are able to overcome this, notwithstanding the fact that the Chinese are also involved in difficulties, as they haven't set a GDP target for themselves, and that itself is a very telling situation.
Okay. All right. So, Admiral, let's take the discussion forward then. All right. As far as this entire situation is concerned, considering where we are and where we stand, considering that the economy is also going to play a big role in what's likely to happen in the near future, because that's a point that I raised earlier as well. Because most of these island nations are dependent on tourism. When there are no flights, when there is no tourism, that is something that's going to be playing on their minds a lot. How can we take on the economic might of China going forward and help these countries out? Do you believe that these countries are going to be looking towards us and, ensuring that we show them the way?
Well, I think that's a good question, because you can't beat China as far as the economy and the money is concerned. We are far behind, and therefore helping them in a time when it is required, time like this, that is important. And both our panelists, they have mentioned this, that you have to create an environment of goodwill, and how we convert that goodwill into gains and action, as you rightly said. I was just talking about that part. No adventurism, but these are all as an indicator. But you are quite right. Till such time our economy develops to an extent where these people start looking up to you, they still have a lot of dealing with China, and they will continue to have dealing with China. But when you say a transparent method, when you say a method by in which they are participants, it will India scores much higher, and that is where our diplomacy has done very well. That we are actually considered. You see India's impression in the world, it outdoes China by many miles. At the moment, China's popularity is at the absolute zero. And yesterday only, their state councillor Wang Yi, he said that we are heading for a cold war. US is taking us to cold war. So these pronunciations make China look more assertive. And therefore, China knows that economically he has overtaken everybody, and shortly they will overtake probably US in few years. So that part is not a worry for them, and there's no need for us to be getting into race. We should only be doing what we can do. We know that we can't do all over the world, but surely we can do it in the Indian Ocean region. Whereas for
Absolutely.
so I think that the economy and security, they go together. As Professor Pant was saying, that Sagar is a very clear pronunciation, and it was pronounced by the Prime Minister in Mauritius, actually, if I'm not wrong. In one of his speech, he made this acronym while speaking in Mauritius. So if you see the two extremities of the Indian Ocean, we can still reach for help to them, either economic, or let us say tourism whenever it opens, or let us say any kind of aid which they require. Or God forbid there is some other disaster, we will be the first responders. And Indian Ocean, providing a net security in all kinds of things in peacetime. What is net security? Is human assistant disaster relief, trafficking, and your drug trafficking, piracy. For all that, it is India which has come to rescue. So it's a good thing that now Prime Minister is shown his willingness to help them economically, so that we can come together and form some kind of network, so that our economies get tied up more strongly on more strands rather than on very few strands. Right now it is on few strands. I mean, he will probably
Correct.
increase the number of strands.
Absolutely. So Professor, how can we continue to engage with our island neighbors going forward?
Well, I think, to begin with, there has to be a realistic expectation, that factors in the China factor. That look, China is a presence. China has been a presence for some time now, and the smaller states around India's periphery will always play China of India, India of China. I mean, that is a reality that is there, structural reality almost that we face. So we can't do away with it. And so long as we are comfortable in our own skin, that look, again, we can't compete with the Chinese on certain metrics. But what we can do, we can ensure that we do better. If we are committed to certain projects, we deliver them on time. If we are committed to certain output, we deliver it on time. And I think the point earlier that was being made, that at a time of distress, if we are giving them a helping hand, that goes a long way in generating the kind of support that perhaps India needs in these countries. Afghanistan is a good example, and for a lot of reasons, India has not been participating in the security structures there. But look at the way India has generated a goodwill through the developmental factor, and at a time when few other countries were willing to invest in capacity building, India was doing it. So I think the sense, and that has generated a tremendous goodwill for India in Afghanistan, with all the problems that are there. Similarly, in these countries, in smaller island nation states, they have their own problems, they will of course reach out to other stakeholders. They're not going to completely rely on India for everything. But what India can do is to project a sense of concern, a sense that India understands their problems, and when the time comes, India will stand with them. So when there is a need for India, these countries can also stand with India.
Right, absolutely. Okay, quick closing comments from my guests now with the best way forward, starting first with you, Ambassador.
We have a fund of goodwill. That is a good foundation to work on in both these countries, despite the histories in both these countries where we've had occasional problems. That's also a fact. We need to build on this. The Prime Minister's calls to both these leaders was timely, as I started off, and it is now for our diplomats and other experts to build on this opening that has been created, so that even during our times of difficulties, we convey to them that India has what it matters to be a true partner even in times of distress and some discomfort.
Absolutely. All right, Admiral.
I think as far as our maritime relationship is concerned, it's extremely good because Sri Lanka is our nearest maritime neighbor, and willy-nilly Mauritius is at the extreme end. But yet, we have reached out to them. In fact, Mauritius has got a presence. The advisor there to the Prime Minister is a naval officer from Indian Navy, and they have been there for a fairly long time. So I think we have to keep building and keep this factor also in mind that, for security as it is willy-nilly, they will depend on you. And therefore, we must assure them right now that when the chips are down, in the peacetime, we are there economically, morally, and probably, physically, some whatever has to be sent, it should be sent to them as far as the material are concerned, or extend the credit lines, or delay the, loan payment timing, etc., or maybe, extend the relationship in all the island countries, including Seychelles and Mauritius and Maldives on this side. So I think we're on the right track.
Okay, all right. And Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Frank, I think it has been quite extraordinary in the way India has been very, very proactive during these times of crisis. At a time when most countries have been very, very inward-looking, India has from the very beginning talked of a regional approach to tackling COVID-19. And I think that will serve India well going forward. Of course, the challenge remains that India has to build its own sinews of energy and economy. But perhaps as the time goes by, as India builds its strength internally, India will have its partners, like Sri Lanka and Mauritius, standing by India because India reached out to them at a time of grave distress.
Okay, all right. On that note, then I'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that we need to focus on our strengths. India is the first responder, really, as far as the region is concerned, and we should continue to do what we have done and what we have been doing so successfully. We should focus on the positives and ensure that we build on the goodwill that we have already built up over the years. And that's the best way forward, is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.